Hi, welcome to our panel on community ministry, appropriately titled, What is Community Ministry? That's what we're going to talk about today. I'm the Reverend Erin Walter, and I am a community minister based out of Austin, Texas. And I've invited three folks in different types of community ministry to join us and share what they're up to. We will just be scratching the surface of the breadth and depth of things that go on under the umbrella of community ministry in Unitarian Universalism and beyond. But we hope that this time gets you started thinking about if you're in discernment around community ministry, if you're part of a congregation that might want to affiliate with a community minister, or if you're just someone who wants to kind of deepen how your UU values relate to your work or vocation. I hope that this time we're going to spend together will be helpful for you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, and then I'm going to invite the rest of our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm super excited to hear about their work because it's very inspiring to me. So I have been ordained for almost 4 years, and I started coming out of seminary as a director with the YMCA of Austin. Director of Community Engagement and Social Responsibility was my title, and I also served as their interfaith chaplain. So that was full-time nonprofit directorship that I infused kind of my call to ministry into. That was a community I was already part of, and it was kind of a magical thing where that job came into my life right as I was getting ordained. I think I got ordained on a Friday and started that job the next Monday. And I did that for about 3 years, and that was the role that brought me into full fellowship as a minister, which is weeds we won't get into right now, but it was a really good community job for me that I really loved. And then the pandemic happened. And so when I started thinking about kind of educating and sharing about community ministry, because I'm also doing a book about this, I was in that nonprofit director role, and I wanted people to understand the way ministers were using their skills and their calling in all different kinds of jobs beyond the parish. And you're going to hear about that from these folks too. But now, since the COVID-19 pandemic, the YMCA had to lay off a lot of folks and eliminate a lot of jobs, including my own. So since then, community ministry has been an even greater gift to me because it's given me room to try different things. And I've been focusing heavily on music. I'm a musician. I play in a couple bands here in Austin called Parker Woodland and Butch County. And so I've been using my music and then doing guest preaching related to the arts and joy practices. So that's to sort of scratch the surface. But I consider myself a music minister now, in serving through music and the arts all around beyond the church. But I could go on, but I really want to hear from our folks who are joining us. And then we're going to talk after we hear kind of what they do and what their jobs are and their callings. We'll talk also about what community ministry is in a broader sense, and what it's been teaching us and what you might do to connect with this part of the UU movement. So first, I'm going to invite the Reverend Christian Schmidt to introduce himself, tell you where he is, what he's been up to. Christian, thanks for being part of the panel.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here too, and to work with all of y'all on this. And so to give a little capsule of where I am, I live in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C. right now. I've lived all over the country as a minister in the last 10 years. And I am in a weird sort of intersection or on the margins or whatever of community ministry. As someone who served in a lot of parish positions and currently serves in a parish position. So I've had a lot of work working with affiliated community ministers, but also as someone who is bivocational and has put a lot of my ministry skills and background into a weird little niche job as a tax preparer, specifically for clergy taxes, because most people don't know, but clergy have a lot of really strange provisions that apply to taxes. and it's a niche within a niche. But what I found out is that a lot of the work with people, and certainly the pastoral care and the ability to communicate across sort of cultural or legalistic or all sorts of different boundaries has been really helpful in that. But when Erin was putting together the book, actually, I said, you should really do something about bivocationality too, because a lot of community ministry is not synonymous with that, but a lot of community ministers are putting together a living in creative ways and combining multiple jobs, maybe working within the parish some and outside of the parish, working in what we would consider sort of more traditional community ministry roles like chaplaincy, or perhaps working with a nonprofit, or doing new things like what we might call entrepreneurial ministry, that is sort of working out and creating their own niche and job in the world, which I guess is what I'm doing, even though I'm not always sure it's ministry on days I'm doing the tax business, but I know that it's important. So I'm really excited about some of the weird little connections and ways that we're doing this. And I've also, like I said, I've worked with a number of ministers in my role as a community ministers, in my role as a parish minister. And I think the connection to congregations, even if our primary roles are not within a congregation, the connection to where an important part of Unitarian Universalism lives within our communities really matters too. And I hope I've been a good colleague in that sense, connecting both lay and ordained people and their ministries to our congregations and vice versa. I think that's enough for now. I'm sure we'll talk more about what I do and how it intersects with ministry and Unitarian Universalism and all the above.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to tell you, when you suggested including bivocational ministry in this ongoing kind of publicizing, educating discussion of community ministry, at first I was like, and then of course it makes total sense. And the piece about pastoral care during taxes, I could not have related to harder if I tried. I mean, I have cried in so many a tax office, and I wish that that person had had pastoral care skills. So I love that you're doing this. And what I hope is that people will think about, how they bring sort of the skills of compassion and empathy and listening that I hope they're learning even as congregants in UU churches to their work, because I think people need it everywhere, but I definitely have needed it in tax offices. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to invite Zande to introduce next.
Hello, Erin. Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be with you all this evening and discuss this very important topic. And I'm so pleased when you contacted me about putting something together on community ministry. I'm a military chaplain, and I'm currently stationed in Fort Campbell, Clarksville, Tennessee. I'm in the Army, and the Army's known for having very interesting locations for their duty stations. So I've had the joy and honor of serving various places like the other New York, which is about 26 miles from Canada, New York State, that is. Of course, I've had the supreme honor of being in DC or Alexandria, Virginia. I've been stationed in Augusta, Georgia, and now I'm currently at Clarksville, Tennessee. And so in terms of my chaplaincy, I was ordained quite a while ago. And then I was doing community ministry actually with urban ministry. And as fate would have it, I got laid off and went back to school, took a hiatus, and was doing a doctorate program in Chicago, and kind of drifted away from ministry for a while. And then I just felt the call to come back to ministry and chaplaincy in particular in about 2009 approximately. So I've been fully engaged in chaplaincy, military chaplaincy. It's been so rewarding.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know people are going to be really interested to hear about what it's like to be a Unitarian Universalist minister in the military setting. Do you want to share just a little bit about that now?
Oh, sure. So at first I was a bit, I won't say skeptical or maybe doubtful that I would be, it's just weird. Like in the UU world, I was doubtful that I would be accepted as a military chaplain. But in the military, it was, in fact, there's no better place for us in the military. I mean, in chaplaincy, we are, I'd say more than a third, almost a half of the soldiers identify themselves as spiritual but not religious or no religious affiliation. So I'm actually very at home in the military.
That's so awesome. And would you mind sharing, is there a typical day or week? What does that work look like for you? And then we'll go to Allie for her introduction after that.
Okay. So yes and no, and that's what I love about it. It's not, every day is different. Like you don't know what to expect. However, on the in general, we belong to a unit. And in that unit, you have an office and you have a place where you do your ministry. And a typical work day will start with a gathering of everyone called a formation, usually Monday morning. And everyone, accountability is big in the military. And so you have to check to make sure everyone's still alive, everyone's still there. These are very important questions. And then you go through your week. Typically, there's a lot of counseling, especially after so long of being at war, more than 20 years. We've got lots of issues with post-traumatic stress and a lot of marital issues. So there's never a dull moment when it comes to counseling for a military chaplain.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. Allie, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allie Tharp, and I am the program director of the Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth. So we are a small nonprofit with an office in a church basement in Portland, Oregon. And I would say, so I'm not an ordained minister. I just kind of came into this work out of a calling to do as much as I could in my life to avert a sixth mass extinction of life on our planet, and an unlivable future for me and future generations. So I kind of just like thankfully went to a college that was really big on like, okay, what's your calling? What's your purpose in life? So I came out of my undergraduate degree with a really strong sense of that and got involved in a anti-pipeline campaign against the Keystone XL in Oklahoma and Texas. So since then, it's just really been like a very purpose-driven path for me. And I found the UU Ministry for Earth through one of our ministries, which is a UU Young Adults Network for UU young climate activists. So I got into this role basically as like a convener of other people, other young UU climate activists and environmental justice activists, and then got involved in like representing young adult voices within the UU climate organizing sphere, and slowly over the last 5-6 years have moved into this role of leading more of our programs for both the UU Ministry for Earth and through the UUA. We have a partnership of a campaign called Create Climate Justice. So I would say my role now is really to create educational programs and opportunity for spiritual grounding, opportunity for doing direct work around climate and environmental justice for UUs all over the place. And so I work closely with a lot of community ministers, particularly around Indigenous solidarity, with a few different communities around the continent. And yeah, and then just would say I'm like a case of a lay person who's doing community ministry work. And outside of my role with UU Ministry for Earth, I also kind of move through a lot of food-based community organizing work. So I like cook food for unhoused people on a pretty regular basis. I'm on the board of a food pantry, and the food pantry is part of a partnership with a public park here where we grow edible and medicinal landscaping in the park to create access to like hyper local and organic, healthy, nutritious food and medicine access that's just free and open to the public. So all of that kind of weaves into yeah, ministry around ecological healing and regeneration and preservation.
That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about, one of my hopes is that for young people growing up in our faith and for young adults, that we might give a vision for people of work that they might not even think to pursue or know exists. And so I really appreciate you sharing all that. I often joke that when I was a kid, my dad was a lawyer and my mom was a teacher. So I was familiar with or a social worker, was familiar with Richard Scarry jobs. Do you know the books of Richard Scarry where there's little animals and they all have a noun under their character? And so, there's so many kinds of jobs and work and mission in this world that might not be postal worker, the noun that goes under the character. And so that's sort of a passion of mine, is helping people kind of expand what they think about in that way. And so in the interest of that, because my brain has a hard time sometimes being but what do you do? Will you share with people, for you too, Allie, like I asked Azande, what a typical day or week is like, or does that exist? Is it based on more of an annual calendar for you, the earth work that you do based on particular events and conferences or holidays? I'd love to hear just a little bit more about the nuts and bolts.
Sure. It is seasonal, I would say. And I'm trying to even lean more into that. An earth ministry should recognize the seasons and, that there's a time for new growth and a lot of energy, and there's a time for rest and renewal. But we do focus on, right now, we're focused on pathways to healing and regeneration for the whole spring season. So we're really focused on looking at that on a spiritual and personal level, at a community level with environmental justice and equity issues within environmental issues, and also looking at that in terms of relationship to the earth. And so there's a lot of kind of a new wave of awareness of okay, if we're trying to transform from a social structure that's killing our planet and millions of people every year, that's based in extraction, so basically trying to do work that shifts everything to being rooted in social and ecological healing and well-being as the foundation of our economy, the foundation of what our churches are for in our communities. So I do a lot to try to take these huge ideas and issues and break them into webinars and opportunities for action for UUs. We have a lot of I would say most of our congregations, at least a majority of our congregations, have some kind of earth ministry or climate action team or green sanctuary team. And so I do a lot that's to support those congregational groups, primarily of lay leaders, but sometimes there's a justice minister or a community minister supporting that work. And we especially focus on trying to help UUs understand environmental racism and environmental inequity, because there's a gap in understanding around these things, which I relate to as someone who grew up in a place where that was hidden from view. So to recognize there's a reason we don't know or are kind of things are set up so that the impact of our actions are distant from us. So I do a lot to basically support these groups to have relationships in their communities and to do justice work as a group of UUs around environmental injustices where they live.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So now that each of us has introduced a bit of what we do, I wanted to share, for the sake of those who may be watching for whom community ministry is just really an unknown or new, some examples of other types of community ministry. So hospital chaplaincy, hospice chaplaincy. You'll often have ministers who are, the head of a seminary or who are professors in a college or a seminary. Spiritual direction and spiritual companionship. So, not the same as counseling, but in a similar, vein of spiritual support. And my spiritual director was essential to me coming to understand my call and who I was as an arts minister. So her name is Reverend Kat Cox, and she was the head of the UU Society for Community Ministries for a while. And I recommend that folks look up the UUSCM. They have a lot of resources around kind of the nuts and bolts of lay and ordained community ministry. There's training for lay people who are interested in community ministry. And there's resources, documents, things to help community ministers and congregations affiliate with each other in official and healthy ways. Let me think, what are some other examples? Does anybody else have examples of types of community ministry that are coming to mind?
Prison ministries, airport, cruise ships.
Oh, wow. I had not even thought about cruise ships. Do you know someone who does that work?
Well, I needed one once on a cruise. When my house was struck by a tornado, and it was the second day of the cruise, and I just wanted someone to talk to, like, what do I do? Do I leave? Do I get off the ship? And I said, do you have a chaplain? And they said, well, normally we do, but we don't have one on this ship. I was like, oh, but then that's when it just got me thinking, it is actually a ministry, a chaplaincy.
That's wonderful. I hadn't even thought of that. And of course, people get sick, people lose, you find out someone has died while you're on the ship, and what do you do?
Right.
Thank you for that example. Anybody else?
I was just going to lift up, you worked for the YMCA. There's a lot of community ministers working for either religious or secular nonprofits in various roles. Also, a number of our ordained and not ordained colleagues, for that matter, work in what we might call administrative ministry. That is, they're working for a denomination or for for some sort of body that's above churches, which is another interesting and sort of a weird place to be, I would imagine, in some ways, but very important. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I knew there was a really key one that wasn't coming to my brain, but working for the UUA or UUMA, absolutely. A lot of our colleagues are doing that very important work. Anybody else? I bet the list is so much longer. Those are the ones that come to mind. Go, Allie.
Well, yeah, I guess we've been, like, the work of trying to get UUs activated in environmental, like prisoner support work, environmental justice direct action campaigns. How do you support UUs to understand and show up for people who are risking arrest and stuff like that? That's been a big part of it for me.
Well, and related community organizing of many kinds. I think that's, to some degree, that's what all of us are doing, but some of times it's more obvious for some people. So.
Absolutely. Thank you very much because that's the thing, is the list is so long and there's so much important work going on out there and wanting to help it be seen. And so I will share with you all that even recently in a group of colleagues, a community minister, put out a call for folks to share wisdom that they've written or gained during the pandemic about, and I said, ministry and church work or something. And someone replied and said, well, I'm a community minister. Can I share? And it's like, we were both community ministers, and yet we still had to like clarify that community ministry was considered ministry in the context of this question. And so that's a big part of it. It's just that even ministers often, when you say minister, still picture parish minister, church minister, even though so many of us are doing the work all over. And our faith calls for the work to be done everywhere. So just in some ways, it's like a self-training to remember that, community ministers are ministers and we're everywhere. So with that in mind, I guess I wanted to open it up to the panel to share, what something about the work that you're doing that you really would like people to be aware of, or it could be, to talk about the role that you see community ministry playing in the future of our faith as things are, changing with time, with pandemic, with technology. But yeah, I just want to open it up to you because we just kind of got started and talking about what you do, but if there's something you'd like to share about the role of community ministry in our denomination. And I'm going to move it to gallery view and let us just kind of popcorn a little bit. And if you have something that comes up based on what a colleague says, you don't have to wait for me to ask a question. Feel free to just jump in.
I'd like to say that, if I may, in the military, Unitarian Universalist chaplains are extremely vital. In general, chaplains in the military, our role is not to proselytize or to convert anyone. It's to ensure that every service member has the access to and the right to practice their faith. And it's with the understanding that our spiritual strength is what gives us the most power and what we need to draw upon for difficult times like life and death situations of war. So being in the military has been immensely rewarding because there's a place for us. I came in when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, or actually shortly before. And we're extremely vital in tending to the needs and nurturing those who are not as well represented. Many chaplains are not able to minister based on their denominational dictates. They may not be able to minister in the way that they may want to low density faith groups or to LGBTQ soldiers or people from those different backgrounds. But being a UU, not only was I able to, but that's my part of my mission and my passion. So it's been very rewarding being in the military, to be able to be that conduit for healing, to be spiritual midwives, if you will, for people who are otherwise they don't have as much access to their deep faith resources.
Thank you. I want to ask you the question that I know people are going to wonder. Did you have to do all of the boot campy stuff that we picture soldiers doing in order to be a chaplain?
Oh gosh. So not really in the chaplain school. We have our chaplain version of boot camp, but I recently went to airborne school so that I could serve in a mission with paratroopers. So I actually jumped out of a plane. What was I thinking? I don't know. But so yes, I have done some of the cool hua hua stuff. Hua hua is like it's an army expression. It means like,
That sounds pretty cool. I'm gonna let Christian go.
Well, I was just musing as we were all introducing ourselves that all of us are kind of working at or negotiating or pastorally caring for the intersection between people and systems, and sometimes like pretty oppressive system or problematic systems, like the US military. I mean, I'm not criticizing the military or anything, but it I'm sure that's difficult. Or me with taxes, I mean, literally intersecting with the government and money, which are also really difficult ones, or our food system and the environment. Like, I think, to some degree, I hope all of our ministries and congregations are doing that, but to do that in all these different ways, and think about how we can sort of leverage our skills and connections and what have you for good, whether that's helping one individual do better, or hopefully changing systems. And I confess that I wasn't thinking that way about my taxes before now, but now I kind of do, that I just think, like, I don't want ministers to be freaking out about this when they could go be doing work in the world, right? Like, I want to help them. I want to make it as simple as possible. Um, make a little money off of it, certainly, to support my family, but, like, to provide a way for other people to be putting their energy where they want to be putting it. And I think probably all of us are doing that in some sense, and doing that out in the world in a really intentional way. It feels really good. And sometimes I've done a lot of parish work, and sometimes occasionally you're frustrated that you're stuck within these walls. Not really. I mean, literally, hopefully all our churches are moving out in the world too, but sometimes it can feel really limiting in some ways to be within the parish setting. um, in and there are appeals to it, right? Like a steady paycheck, for instance.
Mhm.
But the beauty, I think, of community ministry is getting out there into the world in the most, like, full present way, and being able to do your work in hopefully the purest form, though that never actually happens, but as close as you can get to that. And that's just so beautiful to me.
Thank you for sharing that. What you bring up for me is I always felt at the YMCA. So I'm a lifelong Unitarian Universalist. So I haven't had that experience of finding it because my mom raised us in it. But so it was just, I really appreciated the opportunity to be clearly a UU minister, as I knew I was, but to serve in this very, what I would consider mainstream, or however you want to call it, organization with all kinds of people. And I might be the first time anyone hears of Unitarian Universalism, and to give them an entry point, and even if they're not going to become UU, but to an understanding of a faith that would welcome them or love them or be rooted in racial justice work or any number of things, right? And I just really loved my 3 years with the YMCA on a lot of levels, but that was definitely one of them. And I would write for the interfaith column in the newspaper, and I would refer to my work at the Y and my connection to Wildflower Church, the UU church that I'm affiliated with here in Austin. And after I give Allie a chance, because it looked like you were going to unmute yourself. It's hard to tell when we're not in the same room. I wish we could all be like on the panel at GA together, sitting side by side. But I want to give you a chance to share, but then don't let me forget to talk and share with people sort of some of the nuts and bolts of that affiliation and what that looks like. Because I think that that's an area I want to make sure that I specify for folks. But Allie, I think I saw you about to unmute.
I will confess that the question has been a little, like, I have a vague sense of what you asked us to talk about at this point, but what's coming up is there was a piece of it around, like, the future of, like, how will we evolve and grow in community ministry and in Unitarian Universalism. So that's what's really on my mind, in the context of trying to do transformative change work, and I feel like the future of Unitarian Universalism is like trying to like bring our values into the world as much as we possibly can, and like that's more important than anything else, really. And yeah, I think I guess for me, I grapple a lot with like not knowing what the future holds in terms of like runaway climate change, or like collapse of our biosphere within my lifetime and things like that. And so it's like I don't have faith that I should be planning for retirement and things like that. So it's like there's a sense of a really deep need for ministry around the transformation that we need to make as a civilization, and there's just such room for growth in that within UU culture, and certainly within like mainstream broader culture. I think we're still generally in denial about what's needed in order to like thrive, much less just survive what's about to happen in the coming decades. That's like, yeah, sadly where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And you retained the question. That was it. Well, yeah, how community ministry relates to the future of Unitarian Universalism. And it was too wordy on my part. So good job retaining that. What you bring up for me before I go to the nitty gritty is this. Community ministry helped me evolve at the hardest time for me, losing my job. I had this concrete job at the Y that was good for me coming out of seminary and gave me, it wasn't a huge paycheck, but it was a paycheck with health insurance and like a container. My children could come to work with me after school. It was really good for me as a mom who was a new minister, and that was really great. But then when that went away, there was still this container for me to look at, well, what is my call? And it has always been, I like to say, I want to see a Unitarian Universalism that moves people. I want people to be moved in body. I teach Zumba also. That's a spiritual practice that as part of my ministry, moved in body, moved in spirit, and then, in movements for justice and music and movements for the earth or positive change. So there was still this container for that mission that then evolved into what I've been doing this year, which is a ton of guest ministry over Zoom. And it's like I could have taken on a parish role and just been with one congregation. But what I've gotten to do is go to about 80 congregations and give them, a little infusion of like, well, this is what punk rock looks like in ministry, or this is what Zumba looks like in ministry, and give them a vision of a little bit of something different for Unitarian Universalism. And that's my hope, is that I'm giving them something to let them like think a little bit outside the box. And so I think community ministry does that. But what also helps, and so what I just want to like lift up from a nuts and bolts perspective, is being affiliated with a congregation. A lot of times the people assume that the congregation pays me, which is not my affiliated congregation. I am not a paid staff member. I am part of their clergy team in a way, but it's more of a spiritual connection and a shared mission. So I tell people when I'm guest preaching, that I'm affiliated with Wildflower and that our mission is growing spiritually together, spreading love, justice, and joy, and that I'm coming in that spirit, right? So helping to bring the mission of the congregation out beyond the church. But the compensation I have to work for in all the other ways. And so there's some challenge, as Christian alluded to, and maybe you can say a little bit more about bivocational ministry, because there's a lot of people having to do that. I mean, that's kind of the real talk for many folks, when they go to seminary, is that it won't, there are full-time jobs for sure, but that might not be the way. And so in my case, it's been more of an entrepreneurial cobbling together of things. But anyway, have the congregational affiliation is not the paid job, but the sort of spiritual and institutional connection, which has helped me be grounded as everything shifted this year and changed. So, but the board and the congregation voted on that affiliation for me, and we stay in touch. I do some pro bono things for the congregation. So for somebody watching who's like a lay leader in a congregation and just hasn't considered having a community minister before, maybe there's someone in your community who's a chaplain or who works in nonprofit or something like that would make sense for you to affiliate with. Maybe you're already in relationship with that person, or maybe at some point they would come to you and ask. And again, the UU Society for Community Ministries is a great resource for how you covenant together and create that relationship. So.
Yeah, and I just want, it's a requirement for a lot of us who are ordained, if you're doing community ministry, to have that connection. But even though it's not required for lay ministers. I think it's a really important thing to have I believe, and this is me talking, I think it's important to have that connection to a Unitarian Universalist community. Hopefully it means, that part of that interconnection is that, but also I would hope the congregation is supportive of that ministry, and even in small ways, is supporting it. Usually not financially, as you lift up, but giving the sort of agreement. And I've worked in a congregation in Berkeley where we had several community ministers, and we had a pretty explicit contract about the support we were giving them. And I was often helping in the little ways I could, and they were always a part of the congregation too, giving a workshop or preaching once a year, perhaps, that sort of thing. It was really a valuable relationship for us, and I think it varies what that looks like across congregations and ministers, but I think it's a really fruitful, it can be and should be a really fruitful relationship for both sides. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, like for example, for me, one of the things that I do in my affiliation with the congregation is I teach the dance spiritual practice class every week, and I use the community room space for that, which is great for the church because members can participate, and also the church gets sort of exposure beyond, because people come to that class over Zoom from all around the world. Really, I have people are dancing on Fridays from Portugal, from Canada, from all around the US. And they get just, a little glimpse into Wildflower Church as well. But it's mutually beneficial. I don't have to find a place. I don't have to do it I don't have to dance in my living room while my kids are trying to do distance learning. It's very nice to have that home base as well. But yeah, just to feel in support, for sure. Go for it, Allie.
I know some congregations do have like the minister who does justice work in the community who's a paid staff of the congregation too. Would you say that counts in the community ministry? I mean, it's kind of a hybrid. You're both a parish and community minister, right?
Yeah, I think it is a hybrid. I was talking to Julica Herman de la Fuente out of the congregation in Minneapolis, I believe, who does that. And I interviewed her for a Q&A that's going to be at the end of the community ministry book. And she kind of talks about it being a hybrid. And I think just like with Christian talking about bivocational, it's like letting ourselves kind of get out of the boxes a bit, right? I'm glad you named that. There absolutely are some churches that staff someone in that role.
Yeah.
Azande, go ahead.
I just think y'all are being so nice about the lack of structural resources to support community ministry. I just want to name it a little more explicitly.
Yeah.
Go for it, Allie.
Well, just that there needs to be more support for community ministers and more investment in this kind of work, as someone who's kind of seeing it from a bit of more that structural institutional side, and not someone who's been through the tremendous hurdles that ordained ministers go through. I don't know, just want to name, y'all are being very nice about this.
That was actually going to be my next question. What are your warnings? What cautions do you have for people considering this call? Please feel free to be, me, I'm like a joy-centered, a joy-oriented person, but please feel free to balance me out with some of that. And I'll yes, go for it. But yeah, what are some of your warnings or concerns or things that you would like for people to know if they're considering taking this path? Because it's not easy. It's not.
From my perspective, the one thing that I wish that I had more time to invest in would be establishing strong connections with congregations. When I was going through preliminary fellowship, I was able to do that kind of like yourself. I was fortunate to be in towns where there was a viable UU church, and they embraced me and wanted stronger connections with the military. But that's not always the case in the military chaplaincy. We go to very remote places, and sometimes there's not a Unitarian Universalist congregation or a viable, strong, thriving congregation. Sometimes we're deployed overseas. So that is one of the challenge I would caution people. And then also the military is somewhat of an all-encompassing environment, or they call it a totalizing. So if you're active duty, you're working sometimes 60, 70, maybe hours a day. You're not gonna just run around and be preaching on Sundays, for fun. I mean, because it's expected that we participate in chapel on post. So that's something to consider. But we do have our growing and ever expanding group of Unitarian Universalist military chaplains. It's just every year it's growing in leaps and bounds, and we're from all different service backgrounds: active, reserve, National Guard, Air Force, Marines, you name them, you name us, we're there. And that's, for me, has been the highlight of my connection with the denomination. And it's been a very supportive group of chaplains. We support one another. We keep in touch even when we're not meeting, and it's been a godsend, really.
That's awesome. Thank you. Christian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ali lifts up a real reality, is that the resources, particularly financial, are really hit and miss. It really depends what kind of community ministry you're doing and who is willing to pay you for it. There's some that are very structured, like the military, to some degree, hospital chaplaincy and that sort of thing. Most prison chaplaincies are basically volunteer or really close, to give a contrast, and then there's a growing community. I mentioned entrepreneurial ministry earlier, which is not really a new thing. It's been around for a while, but most spiritual directors are out there advertising and marketing to get clients, right? You kind of have to be in it for yourself. And most of us didn't go into ministry because we loved advertising and marketing and accounting and
Right.
those things that go into making it financially viable. And I think there's probably a broad spectrum of financially viable to not that community ministers are experiencing every single day. And I hear about a fair amount of it. So, that's a reality. Is even if you want to do it, you need basically a business plan for how you're going to do it. That business plan might be simple. I might get a nonprofit job, right? Like that's one way to do it. But you need to have how is this going to be paid for? Especially in light of, if you're doing seminary, if you're doing ordination track, you're going to build up some debt or have the money to pay for that up front, which I don't think most people do. So, and that's not to say that parish ministry is some cushy, hugely well-paying gig. It's not, but there's a little more stability and more familiarity with people have with it. So it's a different world, and that's frankly part of why I do bivocational work. Is if I lost either one tomorrow, like, our family would be okay, not great, but doing okay. And it provides some diversity of income and some diversity of what I get to do too, which is actually really nice for me. So I think bivocationality is not new either, but it's increasingly going to become the norm, is people putting together different kinds of jobs, some of which may not be what you are called to do, but help pay the bills so that you can do what you're called to do. That may not pay very well or at all. So
Yeah. Azande, did you?
I'm sorry. I was just gonna get to one of the, is as Azana kind of alluded to it. There are some more structures in place than there used to be. The UU Society for Community Ministry is more active and thriving than it's ever been. The UUMA now provides chapters for military chaplains, for community ministers, for I think there's other resources I'm not thinking of. And technology has really helped with that some of the geographically and in other ways diverse communities we had can now still stay connected despite that. I don't know how a military chaplaincy chapter would have worked before the internet, really. I mean, y'all would have been writing letters to each other or something, I guess. But I imagine it's infinitely more possible in the way we're living today than 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the things that's frustrating to me often is that I feel like I don't know how people are supposed to find out about resources. And I mean, I guess this is one of the ways, right? It's like I just feel like so much is word of mouth, or I don't know. And so like, you really have to try and engage with like colleague Facebook groups and, you know, read your emails and all of this, which I guess that makes sense. Read your emails. That was always my message when I worked at the YMCA. Just read your emails. You know, but it's just always like, I know there's resources out there, but one of the things that's been, you know, it's like, I feel like I've had to learn what the minefields are through experience and trial and error, right? Like as a community minister, there's boundaries to be careful of with parish ministers in your communities. And like, you know, sometimes, for example, just today, someone reached out to me wanting me to officiate their wedding because they like my music and, you know, they'd like to have a rock and roll minister officiate their wedding. But if they're a member of a congregation, that's not how it works, right? Like they need to go to their church minister and talk with them and da da da. So there's like boundaries and minefields that I might not have thought of, and that congregants definitely don't know until someone tells them. And so that's kind of a tricky space, I feel like sometimes, especially for community ministers, and that I'm just always kind of trying to understand and learn about. And again, like colleague resources, good officers, this is getting a little into the weeds, but for those who are ministers, having a good officer, that's somebody who can counsel you on, you know, if you're in a tricky situation or something like that, I've just found to be so helpful. But yeah, a lot of times we're in uncharted waters, and at the Y also, you know, I had a really supportive supervisor who really got it, you know, but not everybody's going to have that in their day job that they claim and embody with ministry. But I still didn't have like ministerial expense budget or whatever, you know, or just, you know, discretionary fund, or an understanding and an expectation in my day job that I would be going to GA and I'd be going to the Ministers Institute and all these different, you know, sort of things that you would spend budgeted money on if you were a parish minister, right? So I was always weighing, okay, well, maybe they'll let me go for a week and I'll still do my YMCA work remotely, but I'll pay for the travel, you know, just all of that, you know, it is, Ali, yeah, we could use some more of that kind of support. Azande, go ahead.
If I may, just for 1 minute, be like a corner store recruiter. I will say the military ministry, it's not 100% the most lucrative, but it's very stable. There's benefits for your family, for healthcare, for expenses, for example, to attend GA, to attend the Institute, to go to your annual denominational trainings. And it's in the military, a lot of ministers or chaplains complain that, just not to get too deep into, but like, for example, JAG, like lawyers and doctors, they get extra bonus pay because the military is really hard off for doctors and lawyers. Chaplains don't get the bonus pay, but the reason why is because we make more than our civilian counterparts who are parish ministers in comparison. So if anyone is considering, you know, it's very lucrative. I mean, in that regard, I mean, you know, you're not going to be rolling in money, but it's not as taxing. You're not thinking like, where's my next paycheck coming from? Or, you know, how many more nickels do I have to rub together to pay the rent this month?
Well, and I appreciate you saying that, because I think it's important that we talk about that. Go ahead.
And there's one other really important thing. I'm sorry. This is what
No,
I
no,
meant
I
to
just
say
want
from
to
the
thank
beginning.
you for the real talk about money. It's important. Go ahead.
There's also a program for people who are, let's say they're interested, maybe they have their bachelor's degree, but they don't have a MDiv. It's a candidate program, and the military will actually pay you to go to school and pay you money as a chaplain while you're in school, getting your master's of divinity. And then when you get out, you have a guaranteed job. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's not well known about, but it's another, if someone's interested.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of ministers are struggling to make ends meet. And so I appreciate you just educating people on what, that's an option. Yeah. We're coming toward the end of our time. There's a couple other things that I want to name, but Ali, we've been a minute since we were on your Hollywood Square. Did anything come up for you while we were talking that you wanted to say?
It's really just different examples of community ministry that's kind of floating in my mind right now. So I'm like thinking of like one of the most amazing youth advisors that I had growing up, did a lot of like queer youth support work in Oklahoma City. And that was like really vital, important community ministry in the middle of like, a repressive broader context. And then also some colleagues who did like co-housing projects as a really powerful community ministry work, or herbalism, movement chaplaincy. Like, so there's just kind of like more and more examples coming up for me. And then another thing on my mind is like, because that there's just, it's a systemic issue that care work is undervalued and underfunded, and that this is part of it. This is part of that kind of broader trend in a way, I think. And so we're doing community care and spiritual care work that that we just structurally haven't valued and invested in. And so that, for anyone listening who has money to invest in these things, like, you should, and it's important. And I think I guess that's what I'll say. I'm also thinking about how it's often like people who have the biggest struggles who are also the most innovative, who have like the strongest, most grounded and rooted solutions. So that's why we look to the most impacted communities to lead justice struggles. Like, there's something not exactly the same but similar in terms of people who are so mission driven in their work to actually have brilliant, innovative ministries that are really important for the world to see and be impacted by.
Thank you. And that just brings up for me again what Julica Herman de la Fuente said when I interviewed her, which was she, and I'll maybe ask that we close out with this kind of question, but she was responding to the question of, what message would you have for someone considering an unconventional ministry? And she just said, that if you feel like you're not fitting in where you are, whether it's in the parish or, with the definitions in front of you, that you might be a community minister, and that the world needs whatever this unconventional thing is that where, you're feeling like you're not fitting. And that was definitely something for me. I think I'm basically a bivocational minister now, like Christian has described, because I'm doing music and ministry and putting those two together. And what I'm hoping from like a funding perspective, and, Ali, you talking about, the sort of undervaluing of care work. One of the things that I've been hoping to achieve through this virtual tour that I've been doing is I've been strengthening my muscle with congregations of saying, this is the UUMA, the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, recommended fee scale for this. And, some congregations are not there yet in their budget, and encouraging them to get there, and then saying, and I'm bringing original music to this service, and, artists deserve to be paid as well. So, what's in your budget for a musician stipend or for whatever. And so that's not a place of comfort for me necessarily, but strengthening that muscle to talk about fair compensation and to encourage, for the sake of hopefully lots of colleagues coming behind me in guest ministry and music. Because again, and other colleagues in the parish have said this as I've worked with them on the tour, that they've been underemployed many times. Many of them have said, this is my first full-time employment in ministry. I've been in a part-time, underpaid, overworked ministry up until this one. And now I want to make sure that we're fairly compensating the people that we work with, et cetera, which I've really appreciated from those colleagues. But anyway, the issues of compensation are real and challenging ones. And so I thank you guys for lifting those up. I want to close by asking you a couple of things. One, if you have like a closing message or closing words for people, that you just want them to know around any of these topics. And then two, if people are inspired by your work or have more questions for you, since this is a recorded panel, where can they find you? Do you have a website? Should they come to your work website? How can they get in touch with you, maybe with further questions?
So our website is uumfe.org, UU Ministry for Earth.org, and my email address is alitharp@uumfe.org. And we also have a community organizing and networking platform called createclimatejustice.net, where you can connect with me as well as hundreds of other UUs who do earth justice work. And I guess closing message is really just live your calling, find your passion and live your calling.
Mm-hmm. I would say that for a final message, there's room for healing and for spiritual nurturance everywhere in the world. And consider what it is you're feeling called to do. There was a time when I never would have imagined myself in the military, never, ever. And now that I'm there, I see there's definitely a need and a place for Unitarian Universalism everywhere. So, and then in terms of reaching me, I'm keeping a low online footprint, so you'll have to reach me through Aaron.
And what about just if folks want to reach out about military chaplaincy, they can reach out to the UUMA, right? Or the UUA, there's folks there.
Talk to Sarah Lammert or talk to the UUMA military chaplaincy chapter. And yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that message. And we respect the low profile. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Christian, I'll let you go.
I do not keep a low social networking profile. So if you try very hard, you can probably find me there. But also at Brazos, BRAZOS-UU.org. I'm currently serving the UU Church of the Brazos Valley in Bryan College Station, Texas through August. I'm looking for a new job for next year as they are searching for a more permanent minister. You can also find me on Facebook for my business, which is called Chalice Tax. I think I'm the only one called anything like that, so you should be able to find that easily enough. I think my message very much dovetails with our other panelists, but try something. If you're feeling called to do something, I did not start out to start a new business. I never really wanted to do that at all. But I saw this opportunity and need and sort of looked into what I needed to do to make that happen and made it happen. And I was really lucky that it was relatively low input up front, which helped make it possible. But I think for many of our callings, there's a way to dip a toe in and see if there's something there. You don't necessarily have to mortgage your entire life to make it happen. There's a way to sort of explore first and figure out if there's something there. And I would encourage that rather than mortgaging your life out, say by going to seminary. But there's a way to make it happen. And talking to people who are doing anything remotely like what you think you're interested in, i.e. any form of community ministry, probably might be a way to get some ideas and feedback about how to live out your calling.
That's great advice. Before I even went to seminary, it took me a long time to even do that. And one of the things that was most fruitful that I still draw from is I set up conversations with different ministers, parish and chaplains and such, and that just helped me so much. I think my message to folks would be to, especially for ministers and seminarians, to think about practicing what you preach. Like, what's the message you're constantly giving other people that you might be trying to tell yourself? And for me, I was always telling people that their art mattered and that they were enough. And I was constantly living by or wanting, or, sharing the Howard Thurman quote, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And I believed that, but did I believe it for myself? I really think that in this past year, after losing my more traditional, but still kind of unconventional community ministry job, I've been forced to kind of reckon with that question, and really, it's been such a gift to say, like, no, I'm going to embrace music and the arts as my ministry, not like a sidebar to my ministry, but like, it's my ministry. And I feel like I'm getting to live the Unitarian Universalism that, not that I grew up with, but that I really believe in. And it's not easy. And yeah, but I just really encourage you to listen to even if you're like a layperson, the message that you're constantly telling your friends, to encourage them. What does that mean for you? Yeah. And so you can find me at erinwalter.com, and you can find me at parkerwoodland.com. That's the name of one of my bands. And the music that I bring to churches is there at parkerwoodland.com and on my own website. But I'm just really, really appreciate the three of you for saying yes to having this conversation amidst rich, robust, busy, tiring lives, making time to kind of come across the country over Zoom and share with folks. And to everybody who has watched, we really hope that there's been a nugget of inspiration and encouragement for you, a nugget of truth for you. And please do reach out with any questions. Thank you so much. I hope the three of you have a wonderful everything ahead. Blessings on your ministry and your work in the world.
Yeah. Thank you. Great to meet you, Azande.
I would like to thank our presenters for this workshop, Erin, Christian, Ali, and Azande. I think they did an excellent job of showing some of the different types of ministries that fit within the category of community ministry, UU community ministry. I would also like to thank you for watching this webinar. And I would also like to explain that this addendum has been added after the workshop was submitted many weeks ago to highlight those things that are unique at General Assembly that are relevant to you. And the first is to inform you of 3 live Q&A sessions with the presenters of this workshop during GA. It's also to introduce the other 10 Unitarian Universalist Society for Community Ministries events at GA 21. And lastly, it's to give you an opportunity to go deeper and have an experience at GA that maybe is a little bit more than would be otherwise by volunteering. So with that, I'd like to present the UUSCM grid. You can get it from our website, and it's based on the grid provided by the planning committee. And we have overlaid in these green and yellow boxes the 11 events that UUSCM is doing this year at GA. It's a little hard to read, so I'm going to go ahead and blow up the things in the morning and take a look at those together. So first of all, down here at the bottom, you can see number 672, what is community ministry, this webinar. You can also see number 602, announcing UU lay chaplain denominational endorsement by UUSCM. This is a big deal for us, and we are actually being a silver sponsor this year to launch this program. It gives people who are called to chaplaincy and need certification a path that does not include becoming fellowshipped through the MFC. So please encourage both your friends and colleagues to attend both this workshop and number 602 so that they can participate in question and answers sessions coming up. So at 11 a.m. till noon on Thursday and 11 to noon on Friday and 11 to noon on Saturday, we have 3 networking events. The first is come talk about community ministry. It's just going to be a general conversation to allow people to ask questions and explore topics that are of interest to them. We'll have a main room and we'll also have breakout rooms so that we can keep the size of the groups conversational. On Friday, we're doing a workshop Q&A for number 602 and number 672, these 2 down here. And the presenters from those workshops are going to be available in breakout rooms to answer your questions. On Friday, we're doing a similar event, but it'll also include workshop number 305 that I'll talk about here in a minute. It actually is happening live on Friday afternoon. So on Saturday, we can talk about all 3 workshops in separate breakout rooms. And next, we want to make sure you can find us. So we're having all of our events in the same meeting room and with the same passcode. The passcode is 252525 in honor of 25 Farnsworth, the UUA headquarters in Boston. So now let's take a look at the middle of the day. So we have 3 more events in the middle of the day. The first is on Wednesday, the gathering day for General Assembly. It's going to be a 90-minute opportunity to answer the question, are you called to community ministry? If you are called to community ministry, I encourage you to come and find your people. 10, 12 years ago, I'd been doing campus ministry at the University of Illinois for a long time. And I had lots of good local colleagues, but I didn't have any UU colleagues. UUSCM was my people. I have found my colleagues. I encourage you to come and see if you find us to be your colleagues. And then on Friday, workshop number 305, collaborative covenant writing for community ministers and congregations. It will be a live webinar and it will include a Q&A session at the end. And it's very important in most, if not all, community ministries to have a good relationship with your congregation and with your local ministerial team. And so providing the framework of having a covenant is an excellent way to help your community ministry be successful. And then on Sunday, after the closing celebration, we are going to do a wrap party. If you've been involved in drama, you may have done something similar to this. After you get done with the run of a show, the cast and crew gets together and has a party to reminisce about what has happened. So we're going to do that relative to what has happened at GA, what has happened with UUSCM at GA, and also help make the transition from General Assembly back to the quote unquote real world. So there's also 3 events in the evening. There's on Thursday at 7:30, Breaking Bread with the UUSCM board. We've done this traditionally in the food service area of the exhibit hall. This year, you're going to need to bring your own bread. Next year in Portland, we're hoping to resume in-person events, including this one, Breaking Bread with the UUSCM board. On Friday, there's going to be entertainment that I understand is going to be playing games online with other GA attendees. And then after the end of the day, we're going to have our pub night. Again, this is another tradition of UUSCM. We find a local watering hole near the convention center. Our tradition is for us to buy the appetizers, lots of appetizers, and for people to purchase the drinks of their choice. Again, this is going to be virtual, so you need to bring both your own food and beverage. And then lastly, on the grid here is on Saturday, we're having our 3rd workshop Q&A. Again, this will include presenters from all 3 workshops and have a main room for general conversation. I may not have mentioned that before, but all of our networking events are welcome to all, whether you're interested in a specific topic or not. There will always be a general room for you to have the conversation that you want to have. So now let's talk about next steps here at General Assembly 21. First of all, please come to our 11 events at GA21. Well, I guess you're already attending workshop number 672, so the 10 other events, please join us. Would also like you to visit our GA21 virtual booth. Last year, the UUA Planning Committee put together the virtual exhibit hall quite quickly. This year, they've had all year to plan. They've actually licensed one of the premier pieces of software for this type of interaction. And the booth is going to have videos, it's going to have handouts, it's going to have a special offer to save you money, and it's going to have links to all the different other things we're doing at GA. And it's going to have a virtual, chat room where you can ask for somebody to respond to you directly through the chat room, and we'll have people monitoring that. And then, as I mentioned before, I highly recommend volunteering at General Assembly. It's a great way to get to know other members of UUSCM. It's a great way to be of service. I always have a lot of fun when I do it. I think you will too. We have 3 specific opportunities. The first is to be part of the Zoom networking events. We have 8 of them. Each one needs 3 to 6 volunteers. And we have well-defined roles. The first is a greeter, someone to welcome people into our space and help them get to a breakout room if that's where they need to be. Then we have a moderator, facilitator for the main room who makes sure that everyone gets a chance to speak who wants to. And then we have breakout room moderator facilitators who do the same thing in the breakout rooms. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, we have what we call attendees. People who just say, I'm going to show up. I don't want to play one of the other roles, but I want to be there, because it's important to get lots of people at these events. They'll be more meaningful to all involved if we have lots of people. The second opportunity is the virtual booth chat. Someone needs to moderate that, monitor that and respond when people make requests. And then lastly is we want a swarm of UUSCM GA21 envoys spreading everywhere at GA21. And I use the term swarm in honor of the cicadas brood 10, which by this time at GA should be out fully. We're going to provide you some tools to help you get that done. First of all, we're going to provide you with Zoom backgrounds that you can use when you're in Zoom meetings before GA and at GA. And then we're also going to have conversations at our networking events about how to use social media to get our message across. So thank you once again for attending workshop number 672 at General Assembly 21. And I look forward to seeing you at our different events throughout GA. If you are not currently a UUSCM member, we encourage you to consider it. It's $75 a year if you're a full-time employed person. It's less if you're either part-time employed, volunteering, or a student. If you happen to be a member of the UU Ministers Association, your membership in UUSCM can be free. Talk to us about it. Again, I look forward to seeing you at our various events at General Assembly. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day.